Okay, doing a thing about an election. Now, in this analysis, I'm going to be looking at a few states I consider swing states, and my methodology here comes to a very different conclusion of what most people consider swing states. And as I explain the methodology and start going through the states, it should be clear why some of what are generally considered swing states, I don't consider swing states. So, in this election, what I consider to be the swing states of import are Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Florida, Nevada, Arizona, and I did New Mexico, although after this I don't think it really is. Now, some guys, they want to talk about Iowa, Georgia, North Carolina, or some of like the election mafias, they're gaslighting about Ohio. Way back they were talking about like Texas and stuff. If we're having a discussion about those states, the election is probably over, so it's rather pointless to discuss those states, because if you're discussing those states, there's not a whole lot to discuss about. Now, unlike 2016, we don't have two competitive primaries to make an apples-to-apples comparison and predict turnout based on that. We also didn't have that in 2018. That's what I did last time, and you can look at my predictions from 2016 if you're interested in that and where I went with that. In 2016, I got Wisconsin and Michigan wrong. My sort of algorithm predicted Michigan at 0 and neither candidate winning, but I was afraid to call it that because Michigan, when does Michigan win for Republicans? I was just sort of, I was too chicken to call Michigan, even though the math said that it was a perfect, it was a coin toss. But I did predict Pennsylvania. So that's what I did. And you can see the particulars of the prediction in the description. Now, that said, even though we don't have primary turnout data here, we can look at Trump's primary turnout this cycle as incumbent primary turnout, which is the highest of any incumbent in history. And his incumbent primary was competitive with the competitive primary turnout of the Democrats. And as a rule, competitive primaries get more votes than incumbent primaries, but Trump was neck and neck across the board in terms of how many people showed up to vote for Trump in a non-competitive primary versus how many showed up to vote for any Democrat candidate in their primaries. So that's an interesting fact, and not a fact that I think should be dismissed. But there's no way to operationalize that. That just sort of exists over here as an interesting thing. But unlike with competitive primaries, I have no way to predict future turnout for incumbent primary based on incumbent primary turnout. So I can't connect it. I can't convert this into any kind of prediction model for future votes. It's just sort of an interesting thing over here. But what we do have in 2020 is a whole lot of early voting. On this site, TargetSmart, which is a wonderful little site, I assume, they have wonderful data on early voting, and they use something called modeled party, where they estimate someone's true party ID based on a whole bunch of factors, not just official party registration. And I'm, caveat here, I am just blindly trusting this. I am blindly trusting the site TargetSmart. Okay? If this is inaccurate one way or another, or underestimating or overestimating Republicans or Democrats, that will throw off everything. However, I'm doing something of an apples-to-apples comparison because I'm using TargetSmart data from 2016 to TargetSmart data in 2020, and as long as they're using the same sort of algorithms in both elections, it should be something close to an apples-to-apples comparison. Okay, so my model, the county weight model. The model I came up with is called the county weight model, is what I call it. And in this model, I made the obviously false but useful assumption that each county has a certain number of votes available, specifically as many as there were in 2016. This is obviously not precise. Perhaps the turnout for this election will be higher. Perhaps it will be lower. But so long as any turnout deviation from 2016 doesn't disparately impact counties too much, that a high or low turnout is spread, uniformly across the counties, this assumption should work well enough for a binary prediction. Now, if there is a change in turnout from 2016 that is heterogeneously distributed between the counties, to the extent that is true is the extent to which the predictive validity of my model would be weakened. But I'm assuming that any fluctuation in turnout will be heterogeneous enough that it won't have much of an impact on the final result. So that's what I do. And then what I do is I subtract the number which has already voted in each county to give an estimate of how many votes remain in each county. This is then called the remaining votes. Then I look at how each county went in 2016, and I multiply the remaining votes in each county by the percentage Trump or Hillary got for each county to estimate how many remaining votes Trump and Biden have for each county this round. Then add those up, and the remaining votes go to each candidate. And here are the results for the states that I think matter. And I have spreadsheets, of course, linked for all of this if you want to dig into them. But here in this video, I'll just give the final estimates. So for Wisconsin, 1,208,256 votes for Trump is my final prediction for this model. Excuse me, that's not my final prediction. That's this model's prediction. My actual predictions are going to be different from these, but I'll explain that in a bit. 1,194,277 votes for Biden. For Pennsylvania, about 2.7 million for Trump, about 3.1 million for Biden. For Michigan, about 2.109 million for Trump, 2.161 million for Biden. For Arizona, 1.219 million for Trump, 1.232 million for Biden. For Nevada, about 503,000 for Trump, about 538,000 for Biden. For Florida, 4.393 million for Trump, 4.540 million for Biden. For Minnesota, 1.170 million for Trump, 1.349 million for Biden. New Mexico, which I did because I thought it would be interesting, but I don't think it is now, about 315,000 for Trump, 421,000 for Biden. Now, don't panic on this stuff. There are a lot of things that this model does not take into consideration. The first, and what I think is the most important thing, is that it doesn't take into account heterogeneity within counties. For example, in Pennsylvania, take Philadelphia County. Say Philadelphia delivers 30% of the ballots we expect to come from Philadelphia County. This county weight model assumes the composition of those early ballots is perfectly representative of a cross-section of how all votes in that county will be cast. Think of it like counties being drained of votes. They're being drained of votes before Election Day itself. The county weight model assumes that Philadelphia or Allegheny County are being drained homogenously, with a proportion of Republican and Democrat voters being drained from those counties out in the same ratios as they are ultimately going to vote. This, of course, is almost certainly not true. The Republican Election Day swing that occurs in every election cycle, Republicans vote more on day of. Okay, so the Republican Election Day swing occurs both between counties and within counties. That is, the Republicans in Philadelphia, the Republicans in Allegheny are going to vote more on Election Day than in the mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania, and same with any other state. And this is with the exception of Arizona. And this is something that this model is not capturing. Okay, this model is not capturing the R swing, any kind of R swing within counties. Now, I come up with, so basically what I am estimating is I'm estimating the election day, the effects of the election day R swing purely based on between county turnout. Okay, and I'm not capturing at all within county turnout, the R swing within counties. And based on that, a state like Michigan, I think, is going to go for Trump. So, so for this reason, the model will almost certainly undercount Republican votes to the extent Republicans vote more on Election Day. And of course, as I said, my actual predictions deviate from these models that I've presented because I'm aware of the ways in which my own model is deficient. However, I cannot quantifiably estimate what the effect of what the within county election day R swing is going to be. I can quantifiably estimate what the between county election day R swing will be, but within county it's more muddled, and so I don't model it. But it exists as sort of a subjective factor. In addition, things like Republican voters voting Democrat, Republican voters voting Republican, that's not something I can look at because all we have here are the party registration of the return ballots. I'm also not looking at independent voters at all. At least this model is assuming that they'll be split like in 2016. And this is actually a weakness of the kind of non-polling based election prediction models in general, that is primary turnout or early voting or any other sort of non-polling based prediction model. The weakness is independence. And crossover voters, but crossover voters aren't as big a deal. The bigger deal is independence. Non-polling models tend to do better when the election is highly partisan and elections that are driven by turnout. And basically what I did here is I just made a turnout model. And these turnout models did poorly in 2018 because in 2018, independents swung to the Democrats. They were actually pretty good at predicting Republican and Democrat turnout. Okay, so the turnout-based prediction models didn't fail in 2018 in terms of what they were narrowly designed and should be expected to do. But people making prediction models, people making predictions based on turnout models failed because these turnout models don't have anything to say about independence. But just, within my model, the fact that my model ignores within county election day swing means that Michigan, Arizona, and Florida are more in play than this model predicts. And Wisconsin, I think, is fairly solid, but I cannot formally give you a number of how I think it's going to play out. And this also doesn't take into account model Democrats voting for Trump, which in this cycle seems like it'll be more likely than model Republicans voting for Biden, given Trump's higher approval rating with Republicans than Biden's approval rating is with Democrats. So for all of these reasons, here is my final election prediction map. No tilt or lean or whatever, just binary outcomes. Okay. This is what I think is going to happen. This is my hard prediction. Trump wins 286 to 252. Pennsylvania's a possibility. Nevada's a possibility. Minnesota's a possibility. New Mexico might be a possibility, but something rather interesting would have to go on with you'd have to have massive amounts of crossover in New Mexico, and I think that could only be driven by Biden's comments saying he wants to shut down the oil industry and shut down fracking. But I think Biden wins those. Trump wins Florida, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And discussions about North Carolina and Iowa are just, okay, bye. That said, predicting things is hard, especially about the future. And hopefully I am as accurate as I was in 2016.